A lot of your time playing Minecraft is spent traveling, and speeding that up can save tons of hours. So in this video, I'll show you the fastest ways to travel in survival Minecraft. The most important thing to think about first are what are the actual main times and scenarios in which we need to travel. The first thing is going through different sections of your base. Let's say from the farm within your base, maybe over to another farm, to your enchanting table, maybe even to a third farm, and then to a storage area or a smelting area. Just a traveling distance that you do for just a couple blocks between different areas of your main base can often take up the most amount of time that you actually are traveling for. So we want to find a solution for the fastest traveling in that scenario. But then we also have to travel between different builds, let's say from our base over to someone else's base. Oftentimes these traveling distances can also take a long time. Even if we're not going for hundreds of blocks, we still have to travel between these two places quite a bit of times. This could even be between your base and maybe a far out farm or a mining area. There's a lot of different distances that are just a little bit further than between your base that you're still going quite a bit. Now, the third scenario is between very large areas, especially distances I would say that are over 200 or 300 blocks, where you're traveling for quite a long time. Let's say maybe you're going to a distant biome that you go to a lot, or maybe going to a faraway area for a structure, like let's say an ancient city that you've been working on or something like that. There's also this type of traveling between two distances that are not set, and generally this would be when you're exploring. So you're going to areas you've never been to before, you're not sure how far you have to go or really where your destination is, but just that you have to travel for a very long distance to go there. Maybe trying to discover a new structure or a new biome, or even just going to get a new place to live. These long distance explorations through the nether or the overworld or even the end are also something that can take a lot of your time. So how fast are your main traveling methods? Well, if you're just walking and no sprinting, that is 4.317 meters a second, or more or less you're traveling about 4 1/3 blocks every second. Next there's running or sprinting, and not combining that with jumping, that is 5.6 meters a second, or about 5.5 blocks every second. Interestingly enough, that's actually not that much quicker than walking. It just seems quicker because it does have that slight advantage over it, and of course combined with jumping that makes it quite a bit faster. So if you're jumping when sprinting, you're going at 7.127 meters a second, or basically slightly over 7 blocks every second. So funny enough, that means the speed difference between walking and running is actually less than the difference between running and running while jumping. Of course, there is always just swimming as well, so not just going through the water like this, but actually swimming. And although you cannot jump as you're swimming through the water, swimming speed is very similar to that of sprint walking at 5.612 meters a second, or a little bit over 5.5 blocks being traveled every second. And there are status effects which can make this faster. And what about using a boat? Now, of course, you can use a boat on sloped water, but generally it would be flat. And so if you're boating, you're going 8 blocks a second or 8 meters a second. This makes it somewhat faster than sprint running. This is compared to a little bit over 7 blocks a second with running and jumping at the same time. And so 8 blocks a second for boating is pretty good, considering that it doesn't take up anywhere near as much food energy as running and jumping does. And there are ways of leveling up the speed of boats, which I will get into later. And what about Elytra? How fast actually is this? Of course, it's much faster than most other methods of transportation, but by how much? Well, if you're flying forward with the continuous rocket boost, you're traveling at 33 blocks a second, which isn't actually as fast as you'd think. I think it's precisely 33.5 blocks a second, but still that's only a little over 3 times as fast as boating. If you're gliding at a 30-degree pitch, which is like right here, you're going at about 30 blocks a second, so only slightly slower than continuously using fireworks. However, you can over double the speed of the Elytra if you're gliding at 52 degrees downwards. So that would be like this. The speed we're traveling right now once we get to full velocity is 67.3 meters a second, which is incredibly fast. And of course, if we're sort of going in a zigzag motion, we can use that speed for a large majority of our flight time. And finally, if we're going straight down, we go to a maximum speed of 78.4 meters a second, or almost 80 blocks every single second. And there's also some other ways of boosting yourself with Elytra, which I will get into later. Now, if you're throwing an ender pearl, you end up traveling approximately 20 blocks a second, although of course it does depend on a lot of factors and what angle you shoot it at. And there are also ways you can manipulate ender pearls to go much faster, or you can even keep them frozen. But of course the advantage of ender pearls is getting to places that you normally couldn't. Now for late game Minecraft, Elytra basically removed the use of the ender pearl. However, there are still some scenarios in which it's quite useful, especially if you have some a little bit earlier game, for getting into difficult to get places. If you want a somewhat nether specific travel method, then you can use the Strider. You can actually get the advancement this boat has legs on it, which is quite funny, and you can see these do travel at a fairly good speed. If you're traveling over lava, your speed is 4.14 meters a second, or about 4 blocks every second. However, if you're traveling over something that is not lava and just over blocks, then you end up going very slow at 1.74 meters a second, or a little bit under 2 blocks being traveled every second. But what about the overworld rideable mobs? Namely riding on a pig, which is one of the most useless travel methods, with a carrot on a stick as well as a saddle. At the very fastest, you can only go about 4.19 meters a second, or more or less 4 blocks every second being traveled, and it generally is going nowhere near max speed. Now if you actually right click and use the carrot on the stick, that's what gets you the 4.2 meters a second. However, if you're just holding the carrot on the stick and not using it, you'll only go at 4 blocks a second. But a big level up from riding the Strider and the pig is the main rideable mob, that is the horse. So your standard average horse gives you about 10 blocks a second being traveled, although of course that does depend a lot. Still, that is faster than riding a boat by quite a bit, and that is definitely faster than running and jumping at the same time. The fastest possible horse is a little under 15 blocks a second at 14.5 meters a second being traveled. And of course with horses' strange maneuverability, they can be quite an issue. However, with their jumping ability as well, then it does make them a rather good traveling method. Although of course nothing like the Elytra, with a lot less control as well. Although funny enough, you can break blocks right through the actual horse, under it, around it, whatever you want, as it just does not have a hitbox in any way when you're riding it. And for other variants of the horse like donkeys or skeleton horses, you average about 7 to 8 blocks a second being traveled. So it's always good to have the standard horse if you're wanting to travel with that type of animal. Alright, so those are the main ways of traveling, but there's a lot of methods to boost these to the next level, and even some other strange methods that can get you way faster speeds than that, and way more efficient travel methods that can serve us for any of our traveling purposes. So the first way of upgrading our travel is with soul speed boots. Now you get the soul speed enchantment from piglin bartering in the nether, and when you put those on, when you're traveling on top of soul sand, then you will go faster. However, what's very good about this is you can put blocks with any thickness, all the way up to the thickness of a slab, on top of that soul sand, and the effect will still activate. So if you do not like the look of soul sand, you don't have to have a big ugly path of soul sand all around your world. You could put carpet on top of it. Even easier, you could put slabs on top of it. That still works like this. And if you want something that's almost completely invisible, then you can use the moss carpet like it has down here. This is definitely a really fun way of upgrading your travel experience, and I like how although the speed boost isn't completely insane, this is really great for that group of travel I was talking about, which is travel within your base or travel between your builds, where you're not going that far, but you can still have a really nice presentation for what you're doing. Although of course you could make a massive highway across your world that utilizes that soul speed. It's just of course not as efficient as some other methods we're about to discuss. And just to be aware, it does take down the durability on your boots that have soul speed 3 when you're riding on one of these, and so you'd want the occasional stop with some bottles of enchanting or some mob to kill so you could get your boots mended back up. And if you're sprinting with soul speed 3 boots, then you travel at a little bit over 9 blocks a second, making this just be slightly slower than riding at your standard horse's speed. And I would say it's definitely the perfect method for very small distances. One way of speeding up swimming is if you have a dolphin nearby and you swim next to it, you will get the dolphin's grace status effect, which will make it so that your swimming speed is far improved, with the speed all the way up to 9.8 meters a second, making this actually be slightly faster than your standard horse, and also a little bit faster than going with soul speed. And so there are ways of setting up tunnels with dolphins in them to make you a way to get infinite dolphin's grace and travel super far distances with this effect. And you can stack this effect with depth strider and soul speed to go completely insane distances underwater, which is sometimes a method of players to make a fast travel system, although it is a very large amount of work. Now, other than Depth Strider and Soul Speed, there is also Swift Sneak, and if you have that on your boots when you're sneaking, you can go much faster than with that not being on your boots. And at Swift Sneak level 3, you can crouch and walk at 75% of the speed as you normally could when walking, which is pretty good considering the fact that sneaking is usually much slower than running. Now, one other fast method of travel is to use the Trident. So if we're inside of water and we have a Riptide Trident, we can go incredibly quickly by using that. If it's raining, we can also use that in the air. Although of course it is quite risky, and the momentum it uses is rather strange, so if you're facing straight forward, you can still hit the ground and die. So I'd be aware to be very careful with that unless you have Elytra on, but especially using it through the water, even just to travel underwater, can be a really cool thing, considering that it doubles as a weapon, so if you run into a mob, then you can just hit it with a Trident there. And it's even great for launching off your Elytra, as you can go very far into the air as long as you're in a single block of water, and there's no limit to how far you can go with it, even going incredibly high into the air. And you can even go faster than you would with normal Elytra with the Riptide Trident, which is crazy considering that you can get this fairly early game. But one of the fastest travel methods possible is if you combine this with a pair of Elytra, so you can see us flying right now, and if we keep using this Riptide Trident, we'll get exponentially faster and faster and faster, up to an incredibly insane speed. And basically, no matter how good your computer is, you can eventually get faster than the terrain is rendering in with this Riptide Trident, which is pretty cool. And you can even go incredibly high up into the air with this, so if we shoot up into the air super far with our Elytra equipped, we can eventually get really high up. So right here we're at 650, but you can go even further if you go at some strange methods. So for instance, if you kind of spin around weird, I've been able to end up to 3,000 blocks into the air. So if you do not mind freezing in unloaded chunks, this is 100% the fastest way of traveling in the overworld, going hundreds of blocks a second at full speed. If you want to bring your traveling with boat game next level, then go in boats that are on top of ice. So this could be standard ice like this. You go much faster than you would normally, really up to incredible speeds. So that makes you travel 40 blocks a second, which is faster than you'd usually travel with Elytra. And the speed you travel with packed ice is actually the exact same as standard ice, but in some scenarios standard ice can melt rather easily, and so using packed ice can always be a better method of that. And oftentimes packed ice is actually the easiest ice to get your hands on. But what about the last one, blue ice? Well, with blue ice you go almost double the speed, going all the way up to 72 blocks a second. Now this is incredibly fast, it's much faster than you can go with Elytra, and of course being able to replicate this over long distances without having to worry about firework rockets or any type of fuel. In fact, something interesting about the ice is you do not need half of the ice blocks there. In fact, you can travel between those gaps, so you can just go one piece of ice and then one piece without ice in between like this. And that also makes this method much cheaper, whereas some people might do a 2-block wide path of ice. You can actually just do every other block like this, or even alternate their position to the side a little bit to give you a fully working ice pathway that is anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 the cost and is just as effective. One other method of travel, which mostly is just for fun but can still be really cool, is a player launcher. Now these are basically only really feasible in peaceful mode, as in peaceful mode you do not take damage from TNT, and so because of that you can fly up incredibly far into the air like I did right here. Of course you don't always fly far enough, but sometimes you can fly incredibly far depending on the design, up to thousands of blocks into the air, so that can definitely be a fun thing to try, but of course it's not perfect compared to other methods, and the expense of it really just makes it a novelty for trying out here and there, but still definitely one of the funnest methods. Now something you can do with minecarts if you want to change around how they work a bit is put a whole bunch of minecarts on a minecart track and ride the minecarts and go forward in them, and you can notice they all group together like this, and you actually have a moving minecart machine that has no rails in it. Now eventually it does break apart, but depending on how it's set up it can actually travel for a very long time, like this one I'm chasing right now is. And if you have a flat track, you can have a fully self-propelled minecart system with absolutely no need for anything but just a bunch of minecarts. And speaking of minecarts, what about the standard ways of using them? How fast do minecarts go? Well, I might make a video at some point that goes into further detail about minecarts, but for a basic minecart track going straight with powered rails, you travel at 8 blocks a second, making it be about the same speed as going with a boat. So that can be a good method of travel as well, being sort of something pre-set out. You don't have to think, and you can even AFK when you're riding on the minecart track. So that can always be a good method of travel if you want. Now, something you can add to basically any method of travel to make it much quicker is a speed 2 beacon, but you can also just drink a speed 2 potion, and so either of these methods will make you travel at a much faster velocity, which can level up any of these to be much more efficient and much faster. Speed 1 makes you travel 20% faster in most types of travel, and speed 2 makes you travel 40% faster, and this is the same between beacons and potions, so definitely adding one of these around your base can alleviate a lot of time use. Now, one last effect of travel I've not covered yet is the nether amplification of travel, and it is absolutely insane. Basically every single block you travel in the nether, once you go back in the overworld you'll have traveled 8 blocks. So let's say we have 2 portals that are 100 blocks apart in the nether, and we go out from the other portal, then we're 800 blocks apart those 2 portals are in the overworld. Now I do go into this with more detail of how to make a nether hub and the effects of how that works, and I have a video on that. I'll have an iCard on the screen right now if you want to check out that video. But overall, if you can port any method of travel into the nether, you are literally multiplying its speed by 8 times. So with that in mind, and with all the main travel methods covered, what are the fastest ways of traveling in Minecraft? So the fastest way of traveling in the overworld is with a pair of Soul Speed 3 Depth Strider 3 boots. If you have some soul sand underwater with some slabs on top of it and you have dolphins nearby, you can combine all these speed effects to go at an incredibly quick speed, as you can see right here. And if combined with the speed effect, this can be even more insane. So with the dolphins, the Depth Strider 3, the Soul Speed 3, the speed, all of that combined, you can go up to 144 meters a second, which is an absolutely insane speed. And this actually would be the fastest way to travel in the game if it wasn't for the nether. Of course you can't have water in the nether, so most of these methods actually don't work very well there. The fastest way to travel in the nether is on a blue ice boat pathway. Now basically at full speed here we're going 74 blocks a second, but multiplied by 8, which is the nether distance, we're actually going closer to 800 blocks a second. However, with the incredible danger of the nether, some people prefer not to make ice highways. However, if you enclose them in, they're actually fairly safe. But that is actually not the fastest method of travel. Technically you can make an insane ender pearl cannon or ender pearl stasis chamber, where someone basically destroys the stasis chamber on one end, so you travel back, let's say 30 million blocks, or a cannon will shoot the ender pearl super far. But as you're not technically traveling, and this method is not very reliable at going realistic distances, then although that is the fastest method, for actual general use, I would say for the overworld, if you want the fastest experience just there, use that crazy pathway with the dolphins, but in general you want to use that blue ice pathway. Hopefully you enjoyed this Minecraft transportation guide and answering the question, what's the fastest way to travel in survival Minecraft? I'll see you in the next video and have a great day. Goodbye.